Hi Goodreads, I'm Mitchell Zuckoff, the author of Frozen in Time. Thanks very much for being part of this Goodreads talk. Craig asked, where did you first learn about the events that frame your books Lost in Shangri-La and Frozen in Time? How many more untold stories of heroism in World War II or World War I do you think there are out waiting to be discovered and shared with readers? Craig, thanks for the question. It's a great question, and it's one that keeps me up nights, frankly. I wonder all the time. You don't know what you don't know. I spend a great deal of time, and this is how to answer the first part of your question, how I find my ideas. I spend a lot of time searching through old newspaper archives. I'm a professor of journalism, and I'm a newspaper guy by training and in my heart. And so the old papers contain these gems, and you have to dig through a lot of dry wells and a lot of wasted time, a lot of brassiere ads you get to see. But overall, in time, you can find some of these little nuggets that, if you keep turning them over and polishing them, turn into these amazing stories. Shaylin asked, how much time do you put into writing your books, and how much research do you have to do before you know you have the most accurate information possible? Thanks for the question, Shaylin. I always talk about critical mass. To write a work of nonfiction, you have to gather a critical mass of information that's going to sustain you through 80 or 100,000 words of true storytelling. There isn't, I can't do it by the pound or by an area. You sort of know, you sort of get a sense that I have enough material, I have enough diaries, enough declassified documents, enough maps, enough interviews to start feeling like I've got enough critical mass, enough ingredients, if you will. It's almost like making a meal. You gather all these ingredients and you know I have enough here to feed 2 people if I'm writing a 2,000-word magazine piece, or I have enough for a dinner party for 10 people, 10,000-word piece, or I have enough for a banquet. And that's really what a book is supposed to be for me. And so I can feed 100 people. I can do a wedding party, which means I've gathered enough information, I've gathered enough ingredients to fill that pot. David asked, how concerned were you about your own safety on the Greenland trip? Frostbite, bad weather, plane crashes, all the things that affected the original cruise. Thanks for the question, David. I was legitimately concerned, and it started actually before I even got to the ice. It started when I was in the helicopter on the way. So you fly to the east coast of Greenland to this almost deserted little airstrip in Kulisuk, and then a helicopter pilot, and all these guys are cowboys. They're all half crazy. And so the helicopter then takes you up, and you're flying over toward the glacier, over toward the where I needed to be. And he suddenly dives towards the water of a fjord because he wants to show us killer whales feeding in a feeding frenzy. I'm like, I don't need to see that. Not at 90 miles an hour going down. And then he aims directly toward a waterfall, because there's a waterfall. It's magnificent, but it's coming off the edge of a glacier. So he keeps going toward. He wants us to get a really up-close view to the point where the waterfall is splashing on the front of the helicopter. And I got it. Thanks very much, guy. And then so the safety concerns begin immediately. And then once you're out on the glacier, everybody gets issued one of these. This is a very high-tech device. It's called a whistle. And the plan is you keep it clipped up somewhere near your lapel on your coat if you have a little loop. And if you fall into a crevasse, you're supposed to whistle for help. And I don't know how much good it would do. Fortunately, I didn't have to use it. But kidding aside, safety was a paramount concern. And I was very fortunate to have an incredible safety crew with us out there. So we would go out roped to each other as much as possible. There were times we couldn't be roped, and that was really scary because I, of course, had written about guys falling into crevasses. And so you can't write about men falling to their deaths into crevasses and then be where that happened and not be thinking, oh, Lord, don't let it be me. Kate asked a very thoughtful question. How is it to interview people about strange and difficult times in their lives? how do you even broach the subject? Thanks for the question, Kate. That is an excellent question, and something I talk about. I mentioned before I'm a journalism professor. I talk about those issues with my students all the time because it's never easy. You're dealing with people who are perhaps remembering a really horrible memory, sometimes fresh, in journalism, daily journalism, or in the work I do, sometimes a long buried memory of losing someone they loved. So the best thing you can do is be straightforward, be sincere, and real sincerity, not fake sincerity. You really have to sort of be thinking about what this person has experienced and what they're going to be talking about. You never apologize for your questions. That's one rule, because there's nothing wrong with asking these questions. If you ask them with an open heart and sincerely, and your purpose is not to exploit them, not to bring them more pain, but to give them a little bit of an opportunity to remember someone they loved or remember something that was important and that you care enough to want to write about it. And that's always worked for me. And Tom asks, do you believe students are learning enough history and literature? I ask this because it seems important to you, and I regret, as a middle-aged person, I neglected this in my younger years. Thanks for the question, Tom. Do I think that people are learning enough literature and history? I suspect not, frankly. I'm a dad, so I've watched my own kids go through high school and now going into college. And I feel there has been a little bit of a de-emphasis on what I consider the most important parts of history and literature. I believe classic history and classic understanding of the forces of World War II or the forces of Vietnam or the circumstances really have to be deeply embedded in any good, solid education. And I don't think, I'm a little bit of a traditionalist when it comes to literature, that I love modern literature, but I really want, while kids are in school, to be getting the classics so they know what the writers who are writing the modern literature are learning from. We all learn from those who came before us. So if you learn first about what the classics were and what the understanding of, and you understand them, you'll then understand what follows. So I think I'm a big fundamentalist like you, Tom. Kate asks about the process of actually putting together a work of narrative nonfiction, about getting the information, writing it up, going back out, and thank you for the question. It's a great question. I think every writer has a different process. My process is very much, I'm first and foremost, I'm a glutton for paper. If there's any paper surrounding a topic, whether there are other books that have been written related to it, documents, diaries, I gather them around myself, and so that I can read in. And it goes back to my training as a newspaper person. Before you start talking to people, you should read into something. And by reading in, it means gathering up all this other information and processing it so that the questions you ask when you finally do go out and talk to people are informed. And they're well thought out, and you're aware of what already has been written. And so I'm a big fan of the gluttony of paper, followed by as many interviews as I can. And then I just go and pick up an interview and pick up more interviews, and often that leads to more paper. But then that process begins to kind of be a snowball effect, and I gather enough information to make it work. Diana asked a couple of good questions that I want to touch on. First, she asked, because I've written now 2 books about plane crashes, she wants to know if I'm a pilot or if I have an experience in the cockpit. Absolutely not. I have none whatsoever, which is maybe why I write about crashes instead of successful flights. I was once, when I wrote Lost in Shangri-La, I had to fly in a very, very small plane into the valley that I write about, where the action takes place. And it was one of those little planes where you have to balance the weight, where you have to make sure that the people up front, and I was about the same size as the pilot, so he said, why don't you sit up front with me? So I'm now in the front left-hand side in the cockpit, what was an open cockpit, and I realize I'm flying in through the same notch in the mountain where the crash I'm writing about takes place. So my first thought was, wow, this would really stink if, only my agent would be happy if I went down, and survived, because it would be a good story to tell. But I'm pretty useless in a cockpit, and I was the definition of a dead stick when I was there. Diana also asked how I got into nonfiction, and it really was the only thing I ever wanted to do. I did it as a process to get up to writing books, really very incrementally. I was a newspaper reporter for almost 20 years, working for the Associated Press, working for the Boston Globe. And so first I wanted to master nonfiction storytelling in the classic news format, the inverted pyramid, the most important news up front with diminishing importance on the way down. And then I kept trying new things and longer pieces, and that led me to keep challenging myself. But I got into nonfiction books really by first writing 150-word cop briefs for a small newspaper in Connecticut, and it just kept piling on from there.